It was just another quiet night in Moscow, Idaho. The small town slept peacefully under the cold November sky. But inside one college house, time stood still, for students lay dead in their beds. No cries were heard, no signs of forced entry, just blood-soaked sheets, unanswered questions, and a silence that screamed louder than any alarm. Who entered that house unnoticed? And why did anyone hear the screams? Or were there no screams at all? This isn't a movie. This is real. You're watching Crime Chronicles Confidential, where we uncover the truths behind crimes that authorities would rather keep hidden. It was Sunday morning, November 13th, 2022. The streets around the University of Idaho were still and quiet, like any sleepy college town on a weekend. But at 11:58 a.m., a call was made to 911 from a cell phone. The voice on the other end was trembling, struggling to explain what they had found inside 1122 King Road. Officers arrived within minutes, and what they saw was something no training could prepare them for. For bodies, all college students, brutally murdered in their beds. The scene was soaked in blood, but eerily untouched otherwise. There was no sign of forced entry, no shattered glass, no struggle, just death. The victims were Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. 3 young women and 1 young man, all full of dreams, reduced to lifeless silence in one of the most horrific crime scenes Idaho had ever seen. The university, the town, the entire state, suddenly shaken to its core. Ethan Chapin was the kind of boy every parent hoped their daughter would meet in college. Tall, smiling, respectful. A triplet, raised in a close-knit family. He was known for his love of sports, his loyalty to friends, and his gentle nature. He wasn't just a student. He was a symbol of light-hearted joy and youthful ambition. That night, he was visiting his girlfriend, Xana Kernodle. Xana was sharp, witty, and full of energy. She was the kind of girl who could walk into a room and change its entire mood, born with a resilient spirit. She had faced hardship early in life, but never let it define her. Her bond with Ethan was genuine, rooted in laughter and shared dreams. They spent their final hours together, likely unaware that it would be the last time they ever smiled. Upstairs, Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen were more than roommates. They were best friends since the 6th grade. Their bond was unbreakable, their lives so deeply intertwined that they felt more like sisters and friends. Kaylee was fearless, outspoken, a natural leader. Madison was thoughtful, affectionate, the quiet strength behind Kaylee's boldness. They had planned their futures side by side, dreaming of careers, families, and a lifetime of friendship. That night, they came back from a night out, laughing, perhaps reliving the evening's fun moments. Within hours, they were both dead in the very house they had called home. For lives, connected by love, friendship, and shared moments, were all wiped out in one brutal act. They weren't just students. They were sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, dreamers and doers. In a matter of minutes, futures were erased. Parents were left childless. Siblings became only children. And a town that prided itself on safety was thrown into a nightmare it could not wake from. The horror of it wasn't just in the bloodshed, but in the innocence lost. These were not people involved in anything dangerous. They weren't living risky lives. They were just college kids, young, hopeful, and undeserving of such a dark fate. The question that gripped the town and the entire country was the same. Who could do this, and why? As officers stepped into the now infamous house on King Road, they were met with an overwhelming silence. The kind of silence that weighs heavy, that presses down on your chest, making every breath feel unnatural. The stench of blood hung in the air, thick, metallic, and unforgettable. Each room they entered told a different story, yet none of them made sense. In one bedroom on the 2nd floor, they found the bodies of Ethan Chapin and Xana Kernodle. There were signs of a struggle, furniture slightly out of place, and defensive wounds on Xana's hands. It was clear that she had fought back, even if only for a moment. Ethan, strong and athletic, had no chance. The attack was too sudden, too precise. The killer had struck with such ferocity, and yet with chilling control. Upstairs, in the 3rd floor bedroom, lay Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen. They were found together in the same bed, side by side, lifeless, yet peaceful in appearance. There were no signs of a struggle. No overturned furniture. Nothing to indicate they even woke up. Experts would later theorize that the killer may have struck them while they slept. The idea was horrifying, that someone could get so close, so quietly, and extinguish two lives without even a scream. But what truly puzzled detectives was not just the brutality, but the precision. This wasn't random. It didn't feel frenzied. It felt calculated, chosen, as if the killer had a map of the house in their mind, as if they knew exactly where to go, who would be sleeping where, and how long it would take before anyone realized what had happened. And then came the most chilling discovery of all. 2 other roommates had been inside the house during the murders. They were unharmed. One of them had even seen a masked figure walking to the hallway that night. But she froze in shock and went back into her room, locking the door. She would not emerge until morning. How could a killer murder 4 people and leave 2 alive? Why did they spare them? Did they not see them, or choose not to? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. Fear spread like wildfire across the campus and beyond. Parents began pulling their children out of school. Students stopped attending classes. Armed security was posted everywhere. But it wasn't enough to erase the dread. The house had become more than a crime scene. It was now a symbol of violated safety, a place where horror had entered quietly and left 4 young lives erased, leaving behind only questions, shadows, and a town drowning in fear. From the very beginning, investigators were met with a chilling realization. There were no fingerprints. Not on the door handles, not on the light switches, not even on the knife she'd left behind. No broken windows, no forced entry, and no signs of a getaway. The killer had entered and exited without leaving a trail. It was as if the house had been visited by a ghost. There were no screams captured by neighbors. No frantic calls in the night. Even the neighborhood security cameras revealed nothing useful. The house sat just off a quiet, wooded street, and the surrounding homes were student rentals, none equipped with surveillance. It was the perfect setting for someone who didn't want to be seen. But that perfection raised even more disturbing questions. Who could do something like this so cleanly, so quietly? Was this the work of someone with training, military, law enforcement, or perhaps someone who had studied crime in detail? The knife used was not a common kitchen tool. It was a fixed-blade combat knife, long, sharp, and meant for silent kills. The killer had struck with precision, knowing the layout of the house. They knew the victim's routines, who would be where and when to act. They avoided the surviving roommates, avoided noise, avoided mistakes, except one. On the sheath of the knife, left behind next to one of the bodies, there was a small trace of DNA. It wasn't much. Just a single source touched DNA sample on the button snap of the sheath. It was enough to give investigators a thread, but just barely. With no security footage, no witnesses, and no direct motive, police were left chasing a phantom. The public grew restless. The families of the victims demanded answers. And across the internet, speculation ran wild. Was it a jealous lover? A stalker? A random madman? Or was the killer hiding in plain sight? The absence of evidence was more terrifying than evidence itself. It suggested not recklessness, but control. Whoever did this wasn't rushing. They were confident, methodical, and most frightening of all, they knew how to vanish. She was one of the few people who had been inside the house that night and survived. Her name was Dylan Mortensen. A sophomore, quiet by nature, she had known the victims well. They were her housemates, her friends. But on that night, something happened, something that would leave even investigators struggling to understand. According to police records, Dylan woke up around 4 a.m. She heard what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog. Then she heard crying, Xana's voice, faint, muffled, but unmistakably distressed. She opened her bedroom door, not once, but 3 separate times. And on the final time, she saw him. A tall man, dressed in black, wearing a mask that covered his mouth and nose. He walked right past her, headed toward the back sliding door. She described him as having bushy eyebrows, a muscular build, and not saying a word. Frozen with fear, Dylan locked her door and didn't come out until morning. Why didn't she call 911? Why did she stay silent while 4 of her friends lay dead just feet away? Some say it was fear, pure, paralyzing fear. Others say it was shock, Denial, the brain's way of protecting itself from unimaginable trauma. But there were those who questioned her silence. On social media, critics speculated. Did she know more? Was she hiding something? The reality is far more complex. Trauma doesn't always act the way we expect it to. The human brain, especially under severe stress, can suppress logic, delay reaction, and convince itself that what it saw wasn't real. Dylan was not a suspect. Police made that clear. But the silence that followed her encounter added another layer of darkness to an already terrifying mystery. Her story didn't offer closure. It opened new questions. Had the killer seen her and spared her? Or did he never notice her at all? Did her silence save her life? Or haunt her forever? Whatever the answer, Dylan's presence in that house that night turned the case from a murder mystery into something far more psychological, more disturbing. Because now, it wasn't just about what happened. It was about what was seen, what was felt, and what was never said. As detectives hit a dead end in the physical world, they turned to the only place where traces are almost always left behind: cyberspace. In the digital age, people's lives are mapped across social media, texts, emails, and search histories. The victims were no exception. Kaylee and Madison had posted on Instagram just hours before the murders. Their photos showed them smiling together, standing in their kitchen, unaware that it would be their last night alive. The post quickly went viral, and internet sleuths began digging through the comments, the followers, and the messages. That's when something strange surfaced. One particular Instagram account had liked nearly every one of Kaylee's posts. The same account also followed Madison. And it wasn't just casual interaction. There were direct messages. Repeated. One-sided. Creepy. According to sources, Kaylee had complained to friends just weeks before her death that she felt like she was being watched, that someone was stalking her, maybe even following her car. Police issued digital subpoenas, scanning phone records, cell tower pings, and Wi-Fi activity from the house. They found that someone's phone had connected to the home's Wi-Fi multiple times late at night, before the murders occurred. It wasn't a roommate. It wasn't a visitor. It was someone unknown. Someone who had been there, silently studying the home, the layout, the victims. Then came the chilling data from the cell towers. A white Hyundai Elantra had been spotted multiple times in the area during the early hours of previous nights. Circling, pausing, waiting. It was almost as if someone had been rehearsing the crime. Investigators traced the digital footprints further and found a match to a student across state lines, a criminology PhD candidate named Bryan Kohberger. He had studied criminal behavior in detail, participated in class discussions about murders, and even posted online under fake identities, asking ex-cons about their thoughts and feelings during the commission of a crime. The online evidence painted a disturbing picture, but it also raised unsettling questions. Was this all just obsessive research gone wrong? Or had he used his academic knowledge to become the very thing he claimed to study? The cyber trail didn't just lead to the suspect. It exposed a digital shadow, one that had silently moved behind every like, every message, every GPS ping. And when the dots were connected, that shadow turned into a name. Bryan Kohberger was not the person anyone expected to see in handcuffs for a quadruple homicide. At 28 years old, he was a PhD student at Washington State University, studying criminology, just a short drive from the University of Idaho. He was highly intelligent, well-spoken, and deeply immersed in the academic world of criminal psychology. But behind his academic achievements lay a darker curiosity. Raised in Pennsylvania, Bryan had always been described as socially awkward, intensely observant, and obsessively analytical. Former classmates recalled how he would dominate discussions about serial killers, often taking the conversation into uncomfortable territory. Some said he seemed more fascinated by the killer's mindset than horrified by the crime itself. As police dug deeper, his background began to unravel. His car, a white Hyundai Elantra, matched the vehicle caught on surveillance near the murder scene. Cell tower records showed his phone pinging near the victim's house multiple times in the weeks leading up to the murders, including on a night of crime, though his phone was conveniently turned off during the critical hours. Then came the DNA. The knife sheath left behind at the scene, next to Madison's body, carried a single-touch DNA sample. It didn't match any of the victims, but when compared to DNA taken from Bryan's family's trash bin in Pennsylvania, the match was undeniable. It wasn't circumstantial anymore. The forensic connection was direct. Still, Bryan maintained his silence. He didn't confess. He didn't resist. In court, he appeared calm, composed, even smug. Some saw it as the confidence of innocence. Others saw it as the ego of a man who believed he had committed the perfect crime. Public opinion divided. Was he a misunderstood genius caught in a web of circumstantial evidence? Or a cold-blooded killer who used his knowledge of criminal behavior to manipulate the system, plan every detail, and avoid detection? His professors were stunned. His classmates were horrified. And his family, confused and heartbroken, struggled to understand how the boy they raised became the face of a national nightmare. Bryan Kohberger wasn't just a suspect. He was an embodiment of a haunting question. What happens when someone who studies killers becomes one? The evidence in the Idaho murders case wasn't just built on theory. It rested on three silent but damning witnesses: a car, a knife sheath, and a strand of DNA. The white Hyundai Elantra had been seen on surveillance cameras near the King Road residence in the early hours of November 13th. It was caught circling the neighborhood multiple times between 3:29 a.m. and 4:20 a.m., just before and after the estimated time of the murders. No license plate was visible, but the model and year matched perfectly with a vehicle registered to Bryan Kohberger. Police used traffic cameras, university parking logs, and nearby business footage to create a detailed map of the car's movements. It wasn't just in the area that night. It had been there at least a dozen times before. This wasn't coincidence. This was premeditation. Then came the knife sheath. A military-style K-bar knife cover was found next to Madison Mogen's body. It was tan leather, with the words USMC etched on it, a detail that stood out immediately. But what truly changed the direction of the case was the snap button on the sheath. Forensic teams recovered a single male DNA sample, touch DNA, from that button. It didn't match anyone in the national database. But when investigators collected trash from outside Bryan's family home in Pennsylvania, they found DNA from his father, and the profile matched the crime scene with near certainty. And yet, the actual murder weapon, the knife itself, was never found. Without it, the defense would later argue that the case was built on circumstantial fragments. But prosecutors weren't relying on the knife alone. The combination of digital surveillance, cellular data, the vehicle, the sheath, and the DNA painted a picture that was too specific to ignore. Each piece on its own might have raised questions, but together they formed a deadly timeline. The car showed his path. The sheath showed his presence. The DNA showed his touch. And all three pointed in one direction, toward Bryan Kohberger. The silence of these inanimate objects spoke louder than any confession. They couldn't lie. They couldn't forget. And they couldn't be ignored. As Bryan Kohberger was led into the courtroom for the first time, the air inside was thick with tension. The families of the victims filled the benches, eyes red, hands trembling, some clutching photographs, others barely able to look at the man accused of slaughtering their children. There were no cameras allowed inside. The world had to rely on sketches, hush reports, and second-hand details. But those who were present say the silence of the room was deafening. Kohberger entered in shackles, wearing a prison-issued orange jumpsuit. His expression was unreadable, cold, blank, detached. He didn't scan the room. He didn't glance at the grieving families. He simply stood there, still and calm, as the charges were read aloud. 4 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of felony burglary. When asked to enter a plea, Kohberger remained silent. His defense attorney spoke for him. Not guilty. The words echoed, sharp and surreal. Across the courtroom, Kaylee's mother shook her head in disbelief. Ethan's parents sat stone-faced, their pain visible in every line of their bodies. Xana's sister cried silently, unable to hold it in any longer. As the judge outlined a timeline for the upcoming trial, Kohberger's gaze remained fixed, not on anyone, but somewhere distant, like he wasn't truly present. Some called it arrogance. Others called it psychological detachment. But to the families sitting there, it felt like a final insult. A killer who wouldn't even acknowledge the lives he had destroyed. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered. Some held signs demanding justice. Others simply held candles. The media camped out for days, hungry for details, but the courtroom remained sealed, protecting the process, but amplifying the mystery. Inside, those few silent hours left a permanent mark on everyone involved. The justice system had begun its slow process. But for the families, there was no justice. Only the unbearable reality of empty bedrooms, unanswered text messages, and a future permanently stolen. And standing at the center of it all was a man who showed no sorrow, no regret, no humanity. Just a hollow face beneath courtroom lights. Months into the legal battle, just as the trial was preparing to move into full swing, Bryan Kohberger made an unexpected move. He waived his right to a speedy trial and, according to sources close to the case, considered accepting a plea deal. The news sent shockwaves through the community. Was this an admission of guilt, or just another strategic play by a man who had studied the system too well? There was no official confession, no open courtroom admission. But the whispers grew louder. Kohberger's team was exploring a deal that would spare him the death penalty in exchange for life imprisonment without parole. Some saw it as the first crack in his carefully maintained silence. Others believed it was a trap, a way to avoid the full weight of justice without ever accepting responsibility. For the families, it was a cruel twist. They had waited months for a public trial, for answers, for a chance to confront the man who had taken their children. Now, they were faced with the possibility that he might vanish into the prison system without ever speaking a word in his own defense. But what made the plea consideration even more chilling was the timing. Experts speculated. Was he worried that digital and forensic evidence was too strong? Or was he trying to control the narrative once again? Silencing testimony, avoiding cross-examination, and keeping the most horrific details of that night sealed forever? His behavior remained as distant as ever. No emotion, no apology, no remorse. Just quiet discussions behind closed doors and carefully worded legal motions. To the public, it felt like justice slipping away into technicalities. And beneath it all lingered a terrifying question. Was this a man facing the weight of his own guilt, or a criminal mind playing his final card? As the courtroom doors remained shut to cameras, the trial unfolded in a different place, on millions of screens around the world. TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, and Twitter became digital courtrooms where strangers turned into investigators, psychologists, and judges. The Idaho murders weren't just a crime. They became a social media phenomenon. Online sleuths dissected every known detail. Bryan Kohberger's background, the victim's last movements, the surveillance footage, and the cell tower data. They compared timelines, analyzed body language, and even scrutinized courtroom sketches for hidden meanings. Videos with titles like 10 Signs He's Guilty or What They're Not Telling Us About Bryan racked up millions of views. But with attention came chaos. Conspiracy theories exploded. Some accused Dylan, the surviving roommate, of being involved. Others claimed the murders were linked to secret societies, drug rings, or government cover-ups. In the absence of confirmed facts, imagination filled the void, and the line between evidence and entertainment blurred. The families of the victims pleaded for privacy, but the digital world had no pause button. Kaylee's father took to interviews, trying to set the record straight. Yet, even he wasn't spared. Critics questioned motives. Doubters demanded more. Every post, every word, every silence was dissected, repackaged, and judged. And Bryan Kohberger? His face became a meme, a symbol, a target. Some painted him as a cold-blooded killer. Others saw him as a wrongly accused scapegoat. His every movement, from courtroom glances to prison photos, was analyzed like the plot of a crime drama. The real court had rules, due process, evidence, strategy. But the internet had only one rule, engagement. The louder the opinion, the faster it spread. And in this viral courtroom, public opinion wasn't just loud, it was relentless. Whether Bryan's legal team was influenced by the noise remains unknown. But one thing was certain, justice was no longer confined to court filings and legal arguments. It was being fought, distorted, and broadcast in real time by millions who had never stepped foot in a courtroom. And when the actual verdict comes, It will have to rise above the echoes of a world that already made up its mind. For the families left behind, time split into two, before the murders and everything after. There is no moving on, no closure, only survival. Kaylee Goncalves' parents, Steve and Christy, once looked forward to watching their daughter graduate, travel, build a life. Instead, they now cling to her photos, her journal entries, and the sound of her laughter captured in old videos. Her mother still texts Kaylee's phone, knowing it will never respond, because pretending feels less painful than accepting. Madison Mogan's stepmother broke down during a memorial, her voice cracking as she described Maddie's quiet strength, her compassion, her dreams of working in marketing. Every room in their home holds a memory. Her favorite mug, her notes from school, a half-read book. For her father, silence has replaced pride, and birthdays now feel like funerals. Xana Kernodle's family struggles to comprehend how someone so vibrant could vanish so violently. Her sister, Jasmine, once shared everything with her, secrets, clothes, late-night talks. Now she shares grief, endlessly scrolling through their last text exchange, trying to hold on to words that should have led to more. And Ethan Chapin, his death shattered more than one heart. He was a triplet, deeply bonded with his brother and sister. They had lived their entire lives side by side, never separated until that night. His mother has said that waking up each day without him is like living with an open wound. His father's voice trembles whenever he speaks about Ethan's smile, his sense of humor, his future. None of them wanted justice to become their mission. None of them imagined they'd spend their days in courtrooms and interviews instead of planning weddings, graduations, or vacations. And yet, they become the voices for their children, because their children no longer have voices of their own. The pain isn't just in the loss, it's in the permanence. The chairs at dinner tables that will always remain empty. The birthdays that will never come. The dreams that were buried too soon. And every time they see a headline, a tweet, a theory, they're reminded that their children's lives are now public stories, debated by strangers, reduced to case numbers. But to them, they are still sons, daughters, siblings. They are love that didn't get enough time. The University of Idaho reopened its doors, but nothing felt the same. The laughter that once echoed through the campus had turned into cautious whispers. Students walked in groups now, looking over their shoulders, avoiding dark corners. The familiar red brick building stood unchanged, yet a heavy silence clung to every hallway, every dorm, every classroom. Professors tried to return to normal routines. Lectures resumed, assignments were handed out, but the weight of absence was inescapable. There were empty seats in lecture halls that no one dared to fill. Kaylee's classmates still left her name on group projects out of habit. Madison's photography portfolio sat unfinished on a hard drive. Xana's friends kept checking their phones, half expecting her sarcastic text to light up their screens. And Ethan's fraternity house held vigils instead of parties. Posters for campus events were torn down. Night classes saw record drops in attendance. Even the dining hall felt different, quieter, as if everyone had collectively forgotten how to be young. The house on King Road still stood for a while, surrounded by police tape, a haunting monument to what had happened. Students avoided walking past it. Flowers lined the sidewalk. Notes, candles, stuffed animals, tokens of grief and confusion, piled up at the front steps. It was no longer just a crime scene. It had become a symbol of lost innocence. Some students transferred. Others took semesters off. And those who stayed tried to convince themselves they were safe. But the truth lingered like a shadow, for murders had happened in their world, without warning, without mercy, and almost without a trace. The university held healing circles, brought in counselors, increased campus security. But no measure could erase what had been done. Trust had been broken, not just in the safety of a campus, but in the belief that some places, some ages, some lives were untouchable. Even as seasons changed and the headlines faded, the echoes of that night remained, in the silence between class bells, in the quiet steps on late-night walks, in the way students looked at strangers a second too long. Because once a place becomes haunted by tragedy, its shadows never really leave. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the public slowly began to settle into a version of justice they could understand. Bryan Kohberger stood as the accused, surrounded by a mountain of circumstantial evidence, digital trails, forensic leads, and a wave of public opinion. But behind the certainty projected by the prosecution, a quieter doubt began to creep in. There was no video of the crime, no direct confession, no murder weapon ever recovered. The DNA on the knife sheath, while compelling, was a partial match, not an absolute one. The car seen circling the area matched Kohberger's, but it wasn't exclusive. The cell tower data placed him nearby, but never inside the house. And the motive? Still missing. Some experts called it a solid case built on strong circumstantial ties. Others worried it was a rush to closure, a way for the system to give a grieving public someone to blame. In high-profile cases, the pressure to deliver a suspect quickly can cloud judgment. And when the evidence is interpreted through the lens of expectation, confirmation bias takes root. What if the killer was still out there? What if Kohberger was exactly what he claimed? A criminology student fascinated by murder, caught in a perfect storm of misinterpretation. The families, torn between needing justice and fearing error, place their faith in the process. But faith is not certainty, and truth is not always what we want it to be. The story of the Idaho murders wasn't just about 4 lives taken. It was about the thin line between justice and assumption. In a world fueled by headlines and hashtags, it's easy to mistake resolution for truth. And so, as the courtroom lights dimmed and the final motions were filed, one question remained suspended in the minds of many. Did we find the killer, or just someone who looked like one? When the killer stays silent, it's the dead who begin to speak. Through the blood left behind, the messages unsent, the lives interrupted. They tell us of pain, of fear, of injustice, but only if we choose to listen. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe, and continue the journey of real crime stories with Crime Chronicles Confidential, because the truth is always hiding somewhere.